Can you talk about in some organized religion, what's the original text of reincarnation and why it was taken out?
Okay, the original text of reincarnation comes out of Hinduism and Buddhism. Christianity during the time, so now we're talking about going back in biblical history during the early years before Jesus. And there was so much movement around religion, and spirituality was not called spirituality, but I think during those times in the Eastern philosophies, they were philosophies versus religion. By the time it got to the early church doctrine in the Western culture, it was taken out, going back to my story earlier about the publishers of the time were looking to see what was, number one, authentic and what they wanted to release. Because everything that the disciples talked about during this era, they had experiences with Jesus, they had other spiritual experiences. But if the information that was given was designed to show people how to be independent individuals and free from the structure of governance, then it was taken out. Because governance needs to control people. So we lost that part of our identity of understanding that within the process of life is the incarnation and reincarnation of our souls. So this was too much information. This was too much power. We can't let people know this. We want them to have salvation now in this life. We don't want them to know that they have the power to come back and correct their lives. So that's how really that started, through the political and the social control that occurred. Then you had the theological control. You had the canonical text. You had all of these different elements that pretty much stopped people from really understanding who they are. And they created the text through the Council of Nicaea of what they want to tell people, how they want to create Jesus, how they want to design God, how they want to write the laws, the rules, and the regulations. We only know in biblical scripture that there are 10 commandments. There are a total of somewhere between 60 and 100, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I have it, of laws, precepts, commandments, and other ways of living that we are supposed to do. But none of that was put in the Bible, only the 10 commandments. And technically there was 12, I think, commandments, and the Catholic Church took out 2. This is all control. So they robbed us from the truth. Now, in today's world, it's emerging. The hidden text is emerging. And we are learning things about ourselves and our generations that has never been spoken since 0 AD. Okay? This is the basic fundamental reason why we do not have reincarnation in our scriptures, with the exception of the Eastern, the Indian, and Asian philosophies. It's still there.
Yeah.
So when we read it and we're in another country and it's like, oh, that's taboo. I don't believe that. Well, you don't have to believe it, because who my mother was in this life was not my mother in the last life. I might have been a man in another life. I could have been Asian. We're all going through the cycles of every culture in our reincarnation. I'm not Black every time I'm reincarnated, but we need this knowledge and this understanding, because in knowing that, we can have more empathy for humanity.
I wonder if you have come across any evidence that actually supports reincarnation.
As young children, they are very clear. And they say some of what we consider the bizarre things that doesn't make sense. They'll say, well, I see a ghost. So I see this person, I see, and it's actually happening. Or they'll say something. I remember when my son was little, and I never will forget. I was coming home from work. I had picked him up. I had bought a used car, but it was a nice used car. They didn't call it pre-owned back then. And it was winter. I'm coming down Lakeshore Drive, and my car started having problems. And I'm like, oh Lord, please don't let this car stop. Because Lakeshore Drive also has Lake Michigan right across from it. And so the wind is coming in and the snow is blowing and all these things are happening. So I was just praying to get home. And my son turned around and said to me, be still. Everything is going to be fine. And I'm driving, I'm like, okay, okay. He says, don't you remember? I was your father in my last life. I almost hit the car in front of me. And so I called my mother and I said, Mama, did you say anything to Julian about blah, blah, blah? I said, let me tell you what he just said to me. He told me he was my daddy in his last life. And so she says, no, I didn't say anything. And I realized at that moment, because he was about 4, he was clear. He remembered. But as we get older, the conditionings of the world start coming in, and now we get diluted in our mind, and we can't see or sense as clear as we were when we were children.